At 16, Olivia never imagined that standing up to a cruel comment in her high school cafeteria would set off a chain of events that shook the entire school. Roosevelt High in Cincinnati, Ohio, was a cacophony of voices during lunch, a melting pot of cliques and identities. Athletes dominated one corner, theater kids occupied another, and everyone else carved out their own small territories. For Olivia, her usual seat by the window offered solace. Sunlight streamed through, catching the braids framing her face. She liked the spot. It was quieter, allowing her a moment of peace without fading into invisibility. As one of the few black students in a predominantly white school, Olivia had learned early that being noticed wasn't always a good thing. Her confidence was misinterpreted as arrogance, her laughter too loud, her very presence sometimes seen as a challenge. Still, she smiled often, her warm brown eyes scanning her surroundings as she opened her lunch, a container of homemade jambalaya, its comforting aroma rising with the steam. Across the room, the usual buzz of conversation swirled. Snippets about last weekend's football game, whispers about a party, and the general chatter of high school life filled the air. Olivia focused on the view outside, where the trees swayed gently in the early autumn breeze, offering a brief reprieve from the chaos inside. She had become skilled at blending into the background, keeping her head down to avoid unnecessary attention. But moments of peace like this rarely lasted. It began subtly, like the distant rumble of a storm. A group of juniors, Jason, Mia, and their friends, were seated a few tables away. Their laughter grew louder and more pointed, cutting through the air like shards of glass. Olivia didn't need to look to know their focus had shifted to her. She'd felt this before, the weight of eyes on her, the sting of whispered judgments. Too dark, right? Jason's voice carried, deliberately loud enough for her to hear. You'd think she'd get it by now. For a moment, Olivia froze, her fork hovering midair. The words hit her like a slap, sharp and stinging. But she quickly masked her reaction, placing the fork down with deliberate care. Turning slightly, she met Jason's smug grin and Mia's poorly hidden smirk. Nearby students shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Most avoided eye contact altogether, pretending not to notice. The atmosphere in the cafeteria seemed to change. Conversations faltered and the once boisterous room quieted. Olivia felt the weight of countless eyes on her, some curious, others entertained, but none offering support. Her heart raced, though her expression remained steady. She had been through moments like this before, swallowing the hurt and pretending it didn't affect her. But this time, something felt different. This time, the insult landed harder, more intentionally, as if daring her to react. Jason leaned back in his chair, folding his arms with a self-satisfied smirk. What? No comeback. Nothing to say? A silence rippled through the cafeteria, thick with anticipation. Forks paused midair, and all attention seemed to shift to Olivia and Jason. The charged atmosphere felt like a collective inhale, everyone waiting to see what Olivia would do. Her grip tightened around her fork, her mind racing. She had two choices: ignore it and let the moment pass, or confront it head-on. Jason leaned forward, his smirk widening. What's wrong, Olivia? Cat got your tongue? Or maybe it's hard to talk when you're... Jason stopped. Someone muttered from his table. It was Mia, her voice barely audible, a half-hearted attempt to de-escalate. But Jason ignored her, his arrogance only growing. He raised an eyebrow, glancing around to soak in the attention. What? I'm just being honest. Olivia inhaled deeply, her breath slow and measured, setting her fork down deliberately. She straightened her posture and looked directly at Jason. Her decision was made. You think it's funny? She asked, her voice calm but firm, carrying across the room. To tear someone down for something they can't change? Does it make you feel better? Stronger? Because all it really shows is how small you are. The cafeteria seemed to hold its breath. Jason's smirk faltered, and the laughter from his group died. Olivia's gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of those watching. You don't have to like me, she continued. But if you can't respect me, at least have the decency to leave me alone. The room was silent as Olivia returned to her lunch. Though her hands trembled slightly under the table, she felt a surge of strength. This time, she hadn't let the insult slide, and the ripples of her courage would reach far beyond that lunchroom. The tension that had gripped the room moments before. It was no longer just about Olivia and Jason. It was about something bigger. The students who clapped weren't just applauding her. They were acknowledging a truth that many of them had felt but never voiced. Olivia stood tall, her gaze sweeping across the room. She saw the faces of her peers, some filled with awe, others with guilt, and a few with newfound courage. She didn't need their applause to validate her. She had already reclaimed her power. But the sound of hands coming together, louder and louder, was proof that her words had sparked something real. Jason, still slumped in his seat, looked utterly defeated. His friends shifted uncomfortably, the once smug group now reduced to a silent, uneasy cluster. Even Mia, who had tried to intervene half-heartedly, seemed to shrink under the weight of the moment. Olivia turned back to her table and picked up her lunch. The jambalaya was probably cold now, but it didn't matter. She wasn't hungry anymore. Not for food, anyway. What she craved was something more significant, and in that moment, she had found it. Her voice, her strength, her place in the room. But she wasn't finished. As the applause began to die down, Olivia turned back toward Jason one last time. Her voice, calm and steady, cut through the lingering noise. "Jason," she said, "I hope you take a good look around. This isn't just about me. It's about all of us. Words matter. Actions matter. And today, I hope you learn that you have the power to do better, to be better. It's your choice." Jason didn't respond. He couldn't. Olivia didn't wait for him to try. She turned away, her chin held high, and walked back to her seat by the window. The sunlight framed her as she sat down, a quiet yet commanding presence. The cafeteria began to buzz again, but the energy had shifted. Conversations started anew, but they weren't the same as before. Olivia's words had ignited something, a sense of accountability, a ripple of change that would extend beyond that lunch period. Later that day, whispers spread through the school. Students who had never spoken up before began sharing their stories. Others reflected on moments they had stayed silent when they shouldn't have. Teachers heard about what had happened and used it as a teachable moment in their classrooms. Roosevelt High, a school that had long been divided into cliques and indifference, was beginning to feel different. As for Olivia, she didn't see herself as a hero. She didn't want a spotlight or special treatment. All she had wanted was to eat her lunch in peace and to remind people like Jason that cruelty had no place in their school or anywhere. In the days that followed, something remarkable happened. A group of students organized a campaign to promote inclusivity and kindness, inspired by Olivia's stand. They called it Voices Matter, and it gained momentum quickly. Posters went up, discussions were held, and students who had once felt invisible began to feel seen. Jason, for his part, kept his head down for the rest of the week. Whether he had truly learned from the experience or was simply embarrassed, no one could say for sure. But one thing was clear. He no longer held the same sway over the room. Olivia's actions had shifted the power dynamics of Roosevelt High. She hadn't just stood up to a bully. She had stood up for herself, for others, and for the idea that everyone deserved respect. Months later, when the school yearbook came out, a special page was dedicated to the Voices Matter campaign. At its center was a photo of Olivia, standing tall, her expression calm but resolute. Beneath it, in bold letters, was a quote from her that had become a rallying cry for the school. "Your words don't define me. My voice does." And as Olivia looked at the yearbook in her hands, she smiled. Not because she sought recognition, but because she had proved to herself and everyone else that one voice could indeed make a difference. "I'm sorry." Olivia blinked, momentarily taken aback. Mia's voice was small, her usual confidence absent. She fidgeted, her eyes darting to the side as if expecting someone to interrupt. "For what exactly?" Olivia asked, her voice steady but not unkind. She wanted to give Mia the chance to explain, to confront her own behavior. "For laughing," Mia admitted, her shoulders sagging. "For not saying anything sooner. I knew Jason was out of line, and I just went along with it." Olivia studied her for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Why now?" Mia exhaled sharply, as if she'd been holding her breath. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about it. What you said, it stuck with me. You were right. I was scared of standing out, so I let someone else be the target. And that's not okay." Olivia's gaze softened slightly, but she didn't let Mia off the hook so easily. "It's not just about me, Mia. It's about anyone who's ever felt like they didn't belong. People like Jason only have power because others stay silent." "I know," Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know." Olivia paused, considering her words. She could see the sincerity in Mia's eyes, the discomfort of someone trying to make amends. Finally, she nodded. "Apology accepted. But words aren't enough, Mia. If you really mean it, you'll speak up next time." Mia nodded quickly. "I will. I promise." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Olivia standing by her locker, a mixture of emotions swirling in her chest. She wasn't sure if Mia's apology would lead to real change, but it was a start. The days that followed brought more unexpected shifts. In the cafeteria, students who had never spoken to Olivia before began saying hello or sitting near her table. The group of quieter students who had clapped for her that day invited her to join them for lunch, and she accepted, grateful for their kindness. Even Jason's absence from his usual table was noticeable. While he still showed up to school, he seemed subdued, avoiding eye contact and keeping to himself. Olivia didn't revel in his discomfort, but she hoped it meant he was reflecting on his actions. One afternoon, as Olivia walked through the hallways, she noticed something new on the bulletin board. A flyer for a student-led discussion about inclusivity and respect. It was organized by a group she'd never spoken to before, but the message was clear. The event was inspired by the confrontation in the cafeteria, and they had included a quote from her. "Your words don't define me. My voice does." Olivia smiled to herself. She hadn't sought to become a symbol of change, but if her actions could inspire others to think differently, to speak out, then it was worth it. The day of the discussion, the auditorium was packed. Students from all cliques and backgrounds filled the seats, curious and ready to listen. Teachers stood in the back, proud of their students for taking the initiative. Olivia sat near the front, surrounded by new friends and old ones who had begun to see her in a different light. As the discussion began, a student moderator invited Olivia to speak. She hesitated for a moment, then stood, her heart racing but her resolve firm. "I didn't stand up to Jason because I wanted attention," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I stood up because I was tired of staying silent. Words of power, and how we use them matters. We can choose to tear each other down or lift each other up. That choice belongs to all of us." The room erupted into applause, louder and more genuine than the claps in the cafeteria that day. Olivia sat down, her heart full, knowing she had sparked something far greater than she ever imagined. Roosevelt High would never be the same, and neither would she. As Olivia stepped out of the cafeteria, the crisp autumn air greeted her, carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves. She took a deep breath, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. The events of the past few days replayed in her mind, not as a source of stress, but as a reminder of what she had achieved. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Taylor. "Hero or not, pizza night at my place tonight. Let's celebrate." Olivia smiled, her fingers quickly tapping a reply. "Wouldn't miss it. See you at 7. Walking to her next class, she noticed a flyer taped to the wall. Student Inclusivity Panel. Friday after school, let's talk. Her heart swelled. She hadn't started the panel, but it was clear her actions had been the catalyst. Change was slow, often imperceptible, but it was happening. As the week went on, Olivia saw more signs of a shift in her school. Students who rarely interacted with each other began sitting together at lunch. Teachers encouraged discussions about empathy and kindness, weaving them into lessons in ways that felt genuine, not forced. Even the principal announced plans to create a student-led committee focused on fostering a more inclusive environment. One afternoon, as Olivia walked to her locker, a boy she didn't recognize approached her. He hesitated, clutching a notebook to his chest, before finally speaking. "Hey, I just wanted to say, what you did was brave. I've been dealing with some stuff too, and seeing you stand up like that, it gave me hope." Olivia's eyes softened. "Thank you," she said gently. "That means a lot." He nodded quickly and hurried off, leaving Olivia with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. By Friday, the inclusivity panel was the talk of the school. The auditorium buzzed with energy as students, teachers, and even a few parents filed in. Olivia hadn't planned to speak, but as she sat in the audience, listening to others share their stories, she felt a familiar pull. When the moderator opened the floor for volunteers, Olivia's hand went up. Taking the microphone, she looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some not. "I didn't plan on speaking tonight," she began, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "But I realized that staying silent is exactly what allowed people like Jason to think their words didn't matter." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. Standing up for yourself isn't just about the moment. It's about the ripple effect. It's about showing others that they can stand too. I'm not perfect, and I'm not fearless. But I've learned that courage doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you act anyway. The room erupted into applause, and for the first time, Olivia felt truly seen. Not as a victim, but as a force for change. As the event wrapped up, students approached her to thank her, share their own experiences, and ask how they could get involved. Olivia realized that her stand in the cafeteria had been the beginning of something much bigger than herself. That night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Olivia felt a deep sense of peace. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she had found her voice, and she wasn't about to let it go. This wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning.